Hello and welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong AI, the home of precision guided selling. And today, I'm really excited to be with Dilberth Jimenez, who's the senior sales executive at Tungsten Automation. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Tungsten is the trusted leader in intelligent workflow automation, provides businesses with solutions to automate their most data-intensive business workflows. So, Dilberth, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Excited to be here. So hopefully I can add to your content and add some interesting insight into what we do.
Yeah. You, excuse me. We talked about this a little bit last week. That typically we interview like sales and revenue leads and talk about strategic stuff. And lately, I've been looking for a different perspective for leaders to hear from what I call frontline warriors. My last book was called B2B Street Fighting, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Is kind of getting out of the clouds and into what those of us selling on the street are dealing with. So I'm wondering, Dilberth, from a selling perspective, have you seen the market change over the last, say, 5 years? Harder, easier? What kind of shifts, if any, have you seen?
For the last 5 years, I mean, there's been tremendous change in the way that, technology is being sold and really how customers are buying their solutions. I think customers have become much more aware and knowledgeable about the products themselves prior to even having the first conversation with a sales executive or any of the professionals in the sales field.
Yeah.
So I think coming from my side of the fence, we have to be a lot more aware about the customer themselves, what drives that organization, and then hopefully find ways to understand where the customer or that individual is actually coming from, what motivations they have personally and career-wise that we can help with. And understanding that information has become much more important as things continue to change, right?
Yeah.
And especially now that you're having technology changing with AI and customers becoming much more aware of what it can and cannot do. Those types of conversations really need to be very thoughtful, very strategic with the customer.
It's interesting because you kind of led into my next question about like how's that changing your selling approach. And so if I'm hearing you right, because they're getting the product and technical data themselves, that you've put more of a focus on the human side of selling with the buying influence.
Absolutely, I'm a big believer in people buy from people, and I don't that's always been the case, and I don't think that's going to change even with technology the way it's going. I think it's going to transform it. I think it's going to improve on that. But at the end of the day, I think customers or prospects are going to want to hear what you have to say. If you are somebody that is respected and has a good reputation, they're going to want to hear what you have to say and what recommendations you have for them. And I think AI is just going to augment that conversation, and it's going to help tremendously in the end.
I wonder how you feel about this when I think about relationship. And I've written a little bit about this. There's kind of the human relationship. In fact, it's funny. I was talking to on a podcast with a sales enablement lead the other day, and he said, discovery is almost like dating, right? You're really getting to know one another and building credibility with one another, which I thought was interesting and accurate. So, but I tend to lump this. There's kind of the human relationship side. What does Dilberth do to get to know the human, and then the business relationship of understanding needs? So, when you talk more about the human focus, would you say it's biased toward one of those areas, or you're executing both?
I think if you're doing it correctly, you're not you're not inserting your bias into it.
Yeah.
I think if you're doing it correctly, you are actively listening to what the customer or the prospect is saying to you, and really taking what they're saying, and maybe there may be some underlying meanings behind what they're saying, but really understanding what they're saying and where they're coming from. And I think that can build a lasting relationship, as opposed to trying to figure out a way to direct the conversation for your own benefit. I think the customers and prospects see that, and when they see that, they tend to step back and they take it to kind of they kind of pause for a second, and whether they do it consciously or subconsciously, they take that pause and they start to kind of question what your motivations are. Is this guy really going to help me and achieve what I need to do for my organization and for me personally?
Yeah.
Or is this really a partnership, a relationship that we're building here that we're going to help each other out, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, yes, it's a business relationship, and you're going to have, hopefully both sides are going to end up coming up and benefiting from this relationship. But ultimately, I think from my perspective as a sales executive, you have to have the insight and the ability to let go of your bias and just really listen to what they want to
Yeah.
tell you and what they really need from you. And I think
Yeah.
everything else is going to take care of itself, right? The sale itself, the PO coming in, you making your quote, all this stuff. I think that ultimately will take care of it if you are really focused to what's important, which is what is the customer, what does the prospect need at that moment.
It's such a cool insight, and it's been spinning in my head while you're talking that like all this data, all the technology, all the access to stuff, like it's pushing us back to, or maybe even allowing us to get back to the human relationship and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. That to me is a really kind of cool and refreshing insight, right? That all of this technology is allowing us to do that now.
Yeah, if you're using the technology correctly, I think the technology enables you to be more efficient, if you want to call it that, efficient in that relationship building, right? If you're using technology as a replacement,
Yeah.
then I think you're doing it wrong. I think you're ultimately going to fail,
Yeah.
because there's technology can be used as a great resource for information gathering, for education, to further your knowledge about the product, the service, the industry, whatever that may be. But ultimately, that relationship that is built on trust, right,
Yeah.
from the perspective to the customer or in the sales rep, I think ultimately that's what makes the difference. The
Yeah.
human side of it is what makes the difference, and the human side is really what's going to make or break the relationship, not technology.
Yeah, it's so cool. I'm hearing so much of this trust thing lately, which is different from years ago when relationship was like about that human relationship and fun. And there's always a little whining and dining, which we got away from, right? As everybody
Mhm.
started working from the office. But it's yeah, trust keeps coming up, and I really appreciate that. I also wonder, and I don't want to lead the witness here, but I've heard and read a lot of stats and see it in my own selling that sales cycles have become longer and more complex with more people. And again, not leading the witness, but are you seeing that as well or no?
I think it's remained pretty steady.
Okay.
I think the approach to the buying process has always been based on committee, right? At least the complex sales, the larger side, the larger deals have always
Yeah.
come with that challenge, which is you got to find who, excuse me, who your internal coach is going to be, who's the decision maker, who influences the project, maybe politically or even functionally or budget wise, who has the budget strings. So all those different players within the organizations have always been there. I think now the collaboration between those different task owners, I think that collaboration has increased. Whereas I think in the past it was a bit more siloed than it is now. And as a sales executive in the past, you'd have to kind of play the matchmaker internally within the organization to have people talk to each other and collaborate with each other. I think that has evolved to be more collaborative now. And this is where technology can help, right? This is where you have the calls that we have, the webinars, the web sessions, the Zoom calls, all that stuff that can help people come together and collaborate and work together as a team on a specific project. So, in a way, that's the way that it has changed. But I think the approach from the customer's perspective of how they buy and who is involved in that buying process, I think it hasn't changed that
Yeah.
much.
I love I love the idea of matchmaking, and that's it's a personal bias of mine that I believe we should help the customer make these decisions, right? And
Sure.
which is different than hey, buy my solution. And you talked about that, like doing that matchmaking. I also
Right.
wonder. we in the past we've talked a lot about coaches, and then again, we all know a coach is useless if that coach doesn't have credibility in their organization. Just because you're pals doesn't really help. But we've been in
Hmm.
our own personal selling these days been leaning into what I've been calling thought leaders. Like, and I wonder if you see this, Dilberth, as you're working with different buying influences, you notice that one person, like the other stakeholders, tend to lean in and say, "Well, if she said that, then it must be right." Do you ever get a sense of, hey, this is a person who has a more equal vote that other people are really listening to?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just part of the human side, right? You always have those that stand out and truly become leaders within that organization. And it doesn't have to be by title, right?
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of times you have kind of like I don't want to say empty title, but a person that has the title, but everybody turns right and looks at the one
Exactly. No,
that's
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yep.
you have to be skillful enough to see that and understand that dynamic within the organization, so that you can obviously cater to the title, right? Because
Yes.
you need to have them involved. You need to ultimately, they're going to be making the final decision. But you also leverage that important asset that you have of somebody that is very well respected and has that leadership quality that everybody kind of looks and leans on. And if you're able to understand that dynamic and leverage it the right way, I think that's when you start to do that matchmaking thing, right?
Yeah.
Where you start saying, well, Mr. Leader or Mrs. Leader, this is great. But I also had a conversation with this person and they thought this way. What do you think in that sense? And then when you bring it and then you approach it in that manner, again, it becomes that team type of approach of working together, brainstorming, coming up with ideas, so that ultimately that person feels empowered and feels respected to say, "Yep, my team is there for me and it's supporting me." And so this seems like a great opportunity and great decision to make.
Yeah. You just help. It's funny too, because I love your response to that. And again, the problem for me is like, how do you scale that looking for that thought leader? And I love what you said about like everybody turns to that person and looks at them, because I've been trying to think about like what are the cues, for people who don't maybe have the EQ or don't some of us, and it sounds like you do, like immediately recognize, holy smokes, everybody's listening to her. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, scaling that is tough. And then you said something else too, which I also really like, is leveraging. Hey, Sue said this last week. What do you think about whatever? Is leveraging that insight of that thought leader is also another great step. That, yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
yeah,
S-
because if it comes from you as a sales rep, they're gonna have a second, like they're gonna think twice about it. But if you say,
yeah.
"Hey, your direct report, right? The person your right hand man or woman just said this,"
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
put it out to them, what do you think? That's a lot more powerful, and again, it keeps you engaged as part of that team. You become part of their team.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Back when the last corporate position I had, like you, I'm sure I've been to a lot of meetings that I'm like, what am I doing in this meeting? One of the meetings that I used to love is the HR folks used to run a sort of more of, less of, same of exercise, and I always found that to be helpful and ended up using it with my teams. When I was a VP of national account sales, I'd meet with the RVPs and the national account directors and say, okay, what do you need more of, less of, same of from me? So I want to kind of run through one of those with you, and thinking like not only of your own company, but most sales executives, uh, sort of what do we need more of, less of, same of, is let's start with with the less of. What do you think most salespeople need less of today from the organization?
I think complexity within the organization that they're working with, right? Bureaucracy, as always, and it's always been like this, but it continues to add to it. I think bureaucracy, in terms of the ability to move the sale forward without the major challenges internally,
Yeah.
it's a big factor as to why some deals actually take longer than they should. And so, one of the things that we do here at Tungsten as a team, as a sales team, is that we really pride ourselves in being that advocate for the customer. so that if we see something that needs to be done for them, or that it's required for them to move forward in that sales process, we really try to break down those walls. And I've been fortunate enough to have a really great sales leader that I work with that enables me
Yeah.
to do a lot of this stuff, and it enables me also by getting out of the way, one, or knowing when to get involved and saying, okay, I need to remove this obstacle, this challenge from him so that we can move forward.
Yeah.
So having that team internally, having that approach and that mentality is key to be able to help and move forward and really become that advocate for the customer. I think that in itself, if we can get rid of a lot of the, just added steps
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
added within the organization, I think that would be something that every sales executive I can almost
Yeah.
guarantee you that they would say,
Yeah.
yes, please.
Yeah.
Let's make
It's
it simple, right?
it feels, it rings really true to me when you say it. I'm thinking years ago we did some research, and part of the question was, when you're trying to get a solution configuration approved or get deal terms approved, 85% of the folks we talked to said it's detracting from my ability to win deals. So
Yeah,
this is a
and sometimes lose the deal,
yeah, yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
the customer becomes fed up, they become frustrated, and they say, "Well, look, the buying process is this painful. How, how is it going to be once I am their customer?"
yep, yeah,
So the sales process itself is a first look into not just you as a sales rep, as a sales executive, but also the organization. And they're not just the customers, not just buying a software solution, right? They getting into a contract, into a relationship with the company itself,
yeah,
and how that company is run will impact. Sometimes they'll impact how well the solution works for them. So that is part of the evaluation that prospects take into account. So you need to be aware of that. And if they see major obstacles, just even say, hey, give me a quote, and then 5 days later you still don't have the quote in front of them. That's a problem.
yeah,
and
yeah.
so and so getting rid of those obstacles is paramount, is key.
Yep. Yeah, you're fortunate to have a leader who helps with that, because I do agree with you. How about kind of same of what's working? What do you and your peers you think got from your organization that works, helps keep doing this?
I think it's what I spoke about
Yeah,
just now.
that was my gut. Yeah.
It really just comes down to
Yep.
that. I mean, the product itself speaks for itself. We have a great development team, and they do a great job with keeping up with the product and being the forefront of the technology, ensuring that the product is not just competitive but has some differentiating uh, aspects to it, so that we can leverage that and really use that to help the customer further. But ultimately, it comes down to that human aspect of it. Is how easy is transacting with this organization? How easy, when I ask a question, how fast do they come back and say, Here's your answer?" When I ask for a trial, how quickly do they get that trial up and running? If I ask for terms within the contract phase, how difficult is it to deal with their legal department, with their contracts team? All of these things are what ultimately makes that difference. And so what we do well here within our team is getting rid of those obstacles and making it so that to the customer it's a seamless experience, because I think ultimately that experience speaks volumes for them, especially nowadays. If people don't have the attention span that we used to. Everything's 5 minutes. If within 5 minutes I don't get the answer that I
Yeah.
need, I'm gone.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things is what ultimately has really helped us out in being successful here.
Yep. It's so interesting you say this. Believe it or not, last night I was reordering a prescription on CVS, and what popped up on the prescription reordering was two things. One, we're going to give you your prescriptions cheaper, but two, we're going to make it easier to buy. And they had all these tools
Mhm.
that they put in there about like auto refills and all this other stuff. And it's like I said, it's interesting you say this, because it struck me last night, and from a B2B perspective, like make it easier to buy, and you just nailed that. So my last question has to do with sort of blue skying a little bit, and maybe from like a sales enablement perspective, is there anything that doesn't happen that you would love to have, whether it's data, tools, support, insight, anything that doesn't exist that you say, man, if we as sellers could have access to this, this would really help.
I think ultimately is really, we spend as sales professionals, we spend a lot of time, or at least the ones that are trying to do it right. We spent a lot of time understanding the customer, reading through financials, reading through news about the customer,
Yeah.
all of these things that give you a well-rounded view of your prospect, of your customer. I think being able to have that readily available so that it's concise, it's impactful, and you can get not a 50,000 view, because I think that's too vague, but have enough meat in it so that you can understand the customer and understand their priorities and what they're trying to accomplish. If we can do that in a way that's much less time consuming, that would go a very long way. And I think it
Yeah.
would help us be a lot more productive. And I don't know the answer to that, right? Because there's so much information out there. There's so many areas, so many ways to get to that information that it's kind of difficult. I think maybe AI has a
Yes. Yeah.
opportunity here,
It's so
That-
interesting you say that, because that's what was in my head, and I'm interviewing an executive at Outreach in a couple of days, and he was saying that in the past, like, data collections all been data we can aggregate, and he said, but there's so much soft stuff,
Mhm.
insights, that we couldn't collect before and aggregate. But he said now with AI, we can do that. We can aggregate qualitative versus quantitative data. So yes, I think you're right on that. And that's that. Yeah, we have a whole podcast coming up on that one. But yeah, you've
Mhm.
been super generous with your time and your ideas, and I think of this podcast as kind of a knowledge base for other professionals to come and hear from our peers. And thank you so much for adding to our profession and adding to that.
No, I appreciate you guys reaching out. I think this is a great idea. I think this is something that can help tremendously. I, for one, will definitely follow you and continue to see who else you bring on board, because at the end of the day, learning from each other, right? That's the best way possible to
Yep.
really continue to improve and continue to be successful. So, thank you for the invitation. Glad to be able to do it.
Good. I truly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime, Brian.
Now we stare until Marie comes back.